Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Behind me, 2015 Jeep Grand Cherokee. We're going to be replacing the oil filter housing, or the oil cooler assembly. This is a 2015 Jeep Grand Cherokee, but this engine is in a lot of other vehicles. Dodge, Chrysler, and of course Jeep. And they are all done exactly the same way. Now getting the manifold off is a little different on some of them than others. I believe the Jeep is actually the hardest. So if you're dealing with any of those other vehicles, you're probably better off than this Jeep, just because of the room is a little cramped in there. But really not too bad getting it off. And once you get it off, everything else is exactly the same no matter what vehicle you drive. Torque specs are the same, so should be good to go. I have a video I'm just gonna splice and edit into this one of a past repair I did on this where the manifold had to come off. Once it's off, we'll go ahead and dive in to pulling that oil cooler off. So let's do it. So first off, we're just gonna take off this intake ducting. Flathead on this side, flathead back here. Probably be easier with the stubby over here, but. And then this electrical connector. There's this connector here, and then there's a grommet underneath, so just pull up on this big box, and it'll separate. Let me show you. There's this right here, fits into a grommet hole. The 10mm bolts, there's two of them, one on that bracket and then one on the back bracket. We'll get those 10mm bolts off, and this side is free. Next to the throttle body, we want to disconnect all of these electrical connectors connected to the throttle body. There's going to be two 10mm bolts on top of this bracket. So there's one here, easy to see. The other, you have to feel for it, but it's back there. And then I can't really show you. Well, maybe I can. Let me see. So it's that bolt right there. You can feel it. There's an electrical harness connected to it. You want to pull that electrical harness off, then you can get a socket on there. I believe it is 13mm. So you want to pull that. We don't have to pull it all the way out, just enough so that bracket is loose. There's one up here, can be kind of a challenge. And if you can't get to it on here, as we pull the manifold off or up and out, some of that stuff will be a little easier to get to. There's a hose up here we just pop off. Okay. All right, we'll pull our purge solenoid off back here. There we go. So that's out of the way. We can get to these 8mm bolts. I believe there's 7 of them. And there's gonna be a hard one right here in the back. Little socket and a little ratchet, just enough to get in there, a little bit at a time, and that'll come off. So that's our next step. Then this can come up and then out, and we'll get some of those more connections and stuff in the back as needed. It's just getting stuck on this bracket back here. There we go, it's a little better. Okay, there's a hose back here. You can pop off, big fat hose. And then this electrical connector I couldn't get to before. Pop that off, there we go. Up and out, pull this out. Sweet, the upper intake manifold is off, so now we're caught up together. So I'm gonna set you up. Our next move is to pull the lower manifold off. I believe the fuel rail can stay on. We don't have to remove that from the manifold. But if for some reason we do, we'll just unplug it there from the fuel line. But I believe it all can stay and just be moved out of the way together. But we will be removing our injector harness on both sides just to get that out of the way. And then we just unbolt it and pull it up and out. So each injector has a red tab that needs to be pushed up, and then it's just a pinch and pull. Pop these gray thingies off. There we go. Okay, that should be out of the way enough. Do the same thing to this side. It looks like a series of 8mm bolts. Now before we pull this up, we're gonna vacuum as much as we can and then blow it out. All right, ready to pull it up. Okay, let's look in the back. I think there's a harness connector in the back, or a harness retainer, I mean, just one of those gray ones that will pop up. Okay. Let's see, what else are we stuck on? There's 2 of them. All right, 3rd time's the charm. There we go. We just want this out of the way, just like that. So that's all the farther it has to be out of the way. Let me move you around. We got perfect access to what we need to pull off. So what we're pulling off is the oil filter housing here, and this whole cooler will come out as one unit. And we drop it in a whole new one. Before we get crazy, we're gonna just drop some rags in here. We don't want any bolts or any debris or anything to get put inside those places. Just keep our workspace nice and clean. All right. So it's just a little too dark in the Valley to show you everything. So on the back here, we have a hose that needs to come off, and then these two electrical connectors. Now, your new unit may or may not come with new sensors. If it does not, just pull the old sensors off, put them on your new unit. And when we do that, we want to put some sort of thread sealant on the threads before sealing them or bolting them back on. So that's important, otherwise you'll get a leak out of the threads there. Holding this whole thing on, there's just 2 bolts on this side, and then come to the front here, there's 1, 2, 3 bolts, and everything slides off. Now let's tip this thing upside down. You will have an O-ring on here, a bunch of O-rings here, one here. Just make sure they're all in and they look good. And then we want to put just a little bit of silicone paste or dielectric grease on each one of these, even the O-ring here, so it all slides on perfectly without any resistance. We don't want to rip, especially this O-ring here, we don't want to rip it as it goes in. That's it on this. So we'll pull that one off, get this one back on. Now the kit that I bought comes with new gaskets for our lower and new gaskets for our upper. So we'll make sure we pull those off, put on the new gaskets before we put this back on. So these bolts are an inverted Torx, but if you don't have an inverted Torx to fit, a 1/4 inch socket will fit right over the top nice and snug. So let's get our electrical connectors. So the one on the very bottom does not have a red clip that we have to push back. Okay, so now just that hose. Having angled pliers like this will come in handy in this little spot. Might be easier to pull the hose off once the unit is kind of up and out of the hole. If it is a coolant hose, we don't want it to get coolant mixed in the oil. Just a flathead to pop that off. So the hose has a little plastic retainer back here, a little zip tie retainer. I don't know why Dodge felt that was important. So what I'm gonna do is get a hose clamp, and we're just gonna pinch this hose so that if anything does come out, it'll just be a minuscule amount. Just some hose pliers like this. I'll pinch it off. Put that out of the way. Little wiggle. Okay. Up and out. All right, let's go ahead and clean the Valley. If you're doing this, it's probably because you had an oil leak of some kind running down the back of the engine. That's usually what happens. Is you get an oil leak, it'll fill up this Valley and just start dripping down, getting all over your transmission pan and all that good stuff. So we just clean off all the surfaces for our new gaskets to mate to. And then I'm gonna stuff a rag into each hole and then clean this out really well. That way I don't get any debris in any of these passages while I'm cleaning it out. So pretty much you're just soaking up all the oil as much as you can. We got the Valley all nice and cleaned out the best we could. Having a syringe to get in there is definitely helpful because there's some pretty deep little pockets in there. But getting it with a rag is good too. It'll just take a good number of rags to get all those little pockets. Okay, so the kit came with new bolts. The bolts have a little O-ring on them. And then we're just gonna drop this in. Should just go straight down. You can use the O-ring hole on this side kind of as a guide. There we go. That's pretty much it. And you're just dropping the bolts in and torquing them down. So I'm gonna do on each of these bolts, because there's an O-ring there, I'm just gonna put a little bit of lubricant on there. So as we tighten it down, we don't wanna rip this O-ring either. So a little bit of lubricant's gonna help. You may hear me say dielectric grease or silicone paste. This is what I'm talking about. Just a little tube of it, not silicone RTV. This is different. This is a lubricant, not a sealant. Let's get these started by finger. Now we'll snug them down. So these are tightened to 106 inch-pounds. Starting in this corner here, going across, back, and then over, and then this one here last. Once we have those tight, we put our hose back on, the clamp back on the hose, electrical connectors, and then we'll pull these out and just wipe our surfaces really good, and then we'll install our new gaskets on our lower intake manifold. Okay, that's all that. So we can just wipe from the inside out to get a nice clean surface for our new gaskets. At least you're never gonna misplace your filter cap. Nice Nickelodeon orange. Okay, so underneath, Very carefully, just twist this thing. We'll just pop each one of these out. Use a little pick, little angled pick. Can you see over here? Let me re-angle you. So just pop them out. Just launching our new ones. Now, if your kit does not come with new gaskets, that's okay. Chrysler says go ahead and reuse them. You just have to examine your old gaskets and make that determination. But these are reusable. So if your old ones look like they can be reused, go for it. All right, so we should just be able to set this back down. Make sure you got all your rags out of your intake runners. Feels like it's it. Just finger tighten some of these. Nice. All right, we'll suck those down. So these two are torqued to 106 inch-pounds. The tightening sequence is counterintuitive. You're actually working from the outside to the middle. Sweet. Now that those are torqued down, let's go ahead and put our harness back on, connect everything. Make sure you can hear that snap when you put the connector on. That nice click, just like that. Let's pop these seals off, put on some new ones. Got some pretty blue. We'll put this on. I think we're ready for our manifold. You can see our manifold bolts like to pop through, they just wiggle there. That can get in the way of us setting it down. So what we want to do is put this upside down and tap these just a little so they lock in their upright position. So just put it upside down like that. And just a small screwdriver or whatever you have, and just give it a tap on each one. Doesn't take a lot, just a little tap, and that'll lock them in place. Oh, that one came out completely, no big deal. There we go. Just that little bit locks them in and they don't come out. Let me get that one and put it back in. Of course, it dropped in the abyss. That one went right here. So the opposite of pulling it out, we want it to slide in this direction so that these two studs go in our little brackets over here. Also, before we get too far along, we'll put this back hose back on, because that's really hard to do it after the fact. So we'll just pop it on real quick, just that fat one in the far back. This one here up front, that's no big deal, just that far back one. Okay. There, that's it, easy peasy. We'll get a couple of these started. I always start them by hand because this is a plastic lower, so the upper is bolting into just plastic, so we don't want to cross thread them. And this back one is a little challenging. Perfect, let me give you a torque spec on these. So these are a little lighter torque, 89 inch-pounds. We start in this far back one, then jump to the middle and work our way out. So from this point on, I'm just gonna swing you over to that other clip when we were putting all this back together when we did the rocker arms and that big job. So I'll see you at the finish line. All right, so from here, all we have is to button this side up. There's one hose we can put in, really easy to get to, like that. These electrical connectors, see one of them swings all the way around and plugs into that back sensor. So that could have been done before we put the manifold all the way back, but I believe I can still get to it. All right, that's plugged in. All right, throttle body plugged in. Okay, so we have this bracket back here we can put back in. It's the two 10 millimeters and then that 13 in the back. So I did take the 13 mil all the way out just to get that bracket back on its upper 10 millimeters. It's like if they just gave us 2 more inches, that's all I needed to do. 2 more inches. Like this whole engine, look how much room there is in the front. They could have given us 2 inches. There we go. Okay, put the 13 back. And we'll put that harness back on the end of that stud. There we go. Okay, cool. This side's buttoned up. We'll go over to the other side. So on this side, we just have those 2 brackets. Plug those in, or bolt those in, I mean. All right, there you go. That's how you replace an oil filter housing in a 3.6 liter Pentastar. This is a 2015 Jeep Grand Cherokee, but this engine is in a lot of other vehicles, Dodge, Chrysler, and of course Jeep. And they are all done exactly the same way. Now getting the manifold off is a little different on some of them than others. I believe the Jeep is actually the hardest. So if you're dealing with any of those other vehicles, you're probably better off than this Jeep, just because of the room is a little cramped in there. But really not too bad getting it off. And once you get it off, everything else is exactly the same no matter what vehicle you drive. Torque specs are the same, so should be good to go. All right, start it up, look for leaks. Really only time will tell, because in order to notice a leak, that valley needs to fill all the way up to the brim, just like it did, and then spill out the back. So unfortunately, looking for a leak will take some time, but time will tell, and this repair is complete. All right, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, see you on the next one.